Good evening everyone. Welcome back to part 3 of my real-life series, where I explain how I became a believer in the paranormal. In today's episode, we will walk together as I relive the shocking events that happened to me after I moved out of the haunted house that I grew up in. Every story you are about to hear is 100% true. I will be as open and honest as I can throughout this entire series. So sit back, relax, and turn off all the lights as you enjoy today's video. After graduating from high school, I moved out of the house with my twin brother to attend college at a university in a different city. This was a fresh start for us, and we were excited to be living on our own. The city we moved to is only an hour's drive from our hometown. Just far enough to be independent, but close enough to drive home for a visit on the weekends or holidays. My brother and I decided to share an apartment together since we were new to the city and to split the cost of rent. Our apartment was built in the 1980s, but was still in good shape considering the age. It had tall ceilings, a large covered balcony, and even had a fireplace. The downside being it only had one large bedroom and one bathroom. A detail which will be important for later on in the story. Living on the tallest floor of the complex was great. At the end of the day, it was nice to unwind on the balcony, overlooking the nearby neighborhood, and taking in the fresh air of having our own place to call home. All that was on our minds was having fun exploring this new place and making friends. Months went by, and we settled into a nice routine. Until one day, our past would come back to haunt us. After a long day of classes, I was driving home, ready to enjoy a relaxing evening with the apartment, all to myself. My brother was working that night, so I was looking forward to having some peace and quiet. I parked my truck in the complex parking lot and began walking up the staircase to my front door. Taking out my keys, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Turning on the lights, I was shocked to see what the lights would reveal. Every single cabinet in the kitchen was wide open and all of the drawers were pulled out. My mind started racing. Why would my brother leave every single cabinet door open? Why would he even open all the cabinets and drawers? It didn't make any sense. I texted him to see what the deal was. I quickly got a message back. He told me that he hasn't been home since leaving to go to work that morning. And that he didn't leave open any cabinets, let alone all the drawers in the entire apartment. At the time, I wasn't thinking about the paranormal. Maybe the apartment complex sent in a repairman to do some maintenance that day, and he possibly forgot to close the cabinets when he was finished. I told myself that, and decided to move on. Fast forward a few months, to the middle of October. A good friend of mine came over to hang out one night. We cooked dinner, played Xbox, and enjoyed each other's company. It was getting late, and he asked if he could crash on the couch in the living room. That was no problem, so I grabbed some extra blankets and pillows and told him goodnight as I went into my room to go to bed. The next morning, I woke up and started making us coffee. Making conversation, I asked him how was his night, sleeping on the couch. He said he slept fine, but asked what I was doing in the kitchen at 3 in the morning. I did not go to the kitchen last night, so I asked him what he was talking about. He told me that around 3 a.m., he saw the silhouette of me, just pacing up and down the kitchen. He said that this dark figure didn't open any drawers, didn't try to get a glass of water, or anything. It just slowly walked up and down the kitchen for roughly 5 minutes before he decided to close his eyes and go back to sleep. My friend has no knowledge of the haunted house I used to live in, and I never told him about coming home one day to the cabinets being opened. I didn't want to come across as crazy, so I lied and told him I left something in there, and I didn't want to turn on the lights and disturb him from sleeping. As soon as he left my apartment, I called my brother to tell him about what happened. We were in disbelief, and started coming up with theories on why this would be happening to us. Did something follow us from our parents' house back home? Or was something attached to an object that we brought with us from home? A few weeks go by, and things appear to be settling down. Things were quiet around our apartment, and we started to think that maybe we were being overly paranoid about this entire situation. Unfortunately though, we were wrong. Something would happen to us that we would never forget. On this school night, it was like every other school night. We ate dinner, played Xbox, and prepared ourselves for classes the following morning. You may remember previously that our apartment only had one large bedroom and bathroom. My brother and I each slept in twin beds on opposite corners of the room. As I was sleeping, I randomly woke up in the middle of the night. It was still dark outside, so I turned over to check my phone for the time. It was 3 in the morning. I still had 4 hours until my alarm would go off, so I placed my phone back on the nightstand and turned over to go back to sleep. When I turned over, I became petrified. Standing at the end of my bed was a man looking directly at me, just feet away. I couldn't see his entire body, only his face. When we locked eyes, I became instantly frozen. I didn't want to move, I didn't want to speak. I was praying that my brother would wake up and help me, as this thing is standing at the foot of my bed. After what felt like hours, I slowly pulled the covers over my head and hoped this thing would leave. Many of you may be asking yourselves, why didn't I do something? Wasn't I worried about that guy being a murderer? It's something I can't explain. When I first saw this thing, I instantly knew he wasn't a person. It's hard to explain, but it felt as if he was just showing himself to me. I can still see him, as if it was yesterday. He looked to be in his mid to late 30s. He had short dark brown hair with big brown eyes. He had a slight grin on his face. To me, he was saying, "You know who I am, and now you can see me." I laid in bed, with the covers over my face, until I heard the sounds of my brother getting out of bed for the morning. As soon as I heard him getting up, I pulled the covers off of me. Before I could say anything to him, he says he has something to tell me. This is his story. That night, he was fast asleep when he randomly woke up. His bed was right next to a large window. He turned to look out the blinds, and saw that it was still dark outside. Same as me, he knew he had time to sleep before his alarm would go off. When he turned back over, after looking out of the blinds, there was an old woman standing at the foot of his bed. Similar to my story, he could only see the upper portion of the woman. She was in her 70s with thin black hair. Her dark eyes locked with his, as she began twisting her arms and fingers all around her. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak. He eventually pulled the blanket over his head, and stayed there until the first morning light pierced through the blinds next to him. That weekend, we drove back to our hometown to grab some religious items from our childhood, in hopes that it would scare off whatever was in our apartment. This seemed to have worked. We lived there for a few more months, before moving out to a nicer apartment. The new apartment was great, and we quickly settled into new routines. At this time, we both were in relationships, and spent less time in our apartment. One night, I was driving my girlfriend from her apartment to mine to stay the night. It was around 9:45 p.m., as we were driving through a wealthy, older neighborhood. This was a shortcut I would often take on my way to my new apartment. As we were driving, she realized she left her phone charger back at her place. Being that it wasn't that far away, I pulled into a parking lot to U-turn around. The parking lot was small, with one light pole in the middle of the lot. As you pull in, you can see the entire lot, because it's the small entrance to a nearby hiking trail. I pull to the right, and begin circling around this light pole, to turn back towards the exit. As I circle this pole, I slammed on my brakes, screeching the car to a dead stop. Blocking the only entrance/exit of the parking lot, stood a thin old woman, in a dirty white nightgown. She had no shoes on, and her matted hair, slightly covered her face. Shocked, we sat in silence, as this woman slowly lifted her arm, and pointed to the woods on her left. This woman appeared out of nowhere. We would have seen her, when we first pulled in the parking lot just 3 seconds earlier. My girlfriend looks at me and says, "Should we help her?" I quickly said no, and sped off through the grass, hopping back on the road towards her apartment. We didn't tell anyone what happened, and carried on with our night. 2 days later, I get a phone call from my brother. He was driving home from visiting his girlfriend, and her family. Her family's house was about 20 minutes away, in a different city. The drive back home took you through long, dark country roads that had very little light. It was about 2:30 a.m., and he was on a long, dark, bumpy road. As he was driving, he had to quickly swerve out of the way, going into the ditch on the side of the road. He barely manages to gain control of his vehicle, as he merges back onto the street. Walking in the middle of the dark road, was an old woman, in a dirty white nightgown. My brother said she was pale, and barefoot. He couldn't see what she looked like, because her thick black hair, was covering her face. I then told him about my story. The distance from my encounter, to his, was roughly 36 miles apart. Is it possible, that we saw the same woman? Or was this even a person, at all? Time went by, and we were relieved to have no other encounters with this woman, or any other paranormal activity. We eventually moved into a new apartment, with our good friend, we'll call Tom, for the sake of the story. Tom was a very social guy, often having friends over to crash at our apartment. Late one night, my brother and I come home from a night out, to find the apartment completely dark. It was around 3 a.m., so we quietly walked in, trying not to be loud enough to wake up our roommate. My brother decided to sleep on the couch in the living room, while I went to sleep in my room. I didn't go to sleep immediately. I laid in bed, casually watching YouTube videos on my phone. Laying in bed, I am startled, as I hear the door to Tom's room slam shut. Being so late, I thought that maybe Tom was tired, got up to grab a drink from the kitchen, and accidentally closed his door, harder than normal, by mistake. Without giving much thought, I put my phone away, and fell asleep. The next morning, I got up to make some coffee for everyone. I said good morning to my brother, who was on the couch in the living room, and I texted Tom, to see if he wanted me to make him a cup of coffee. Within a few minutes, I get a text back from Tom. He said he slept at a friend's house the night before, and that he wasn't home. Confused by this text, I asked my brother if he heard Tom's door slam, during the night. My brother took a deep breath, and told me it was him that slammed Tom's door. After coming home from a night out, I went to my room, and my brother went to sleep on the couch. As he was laying on the couch, he saw the silhouette of a person, peeking around the corner of the kitchen, looking towards him, in the living room. He thought that it was either our roommate Tom, or a friend that he had staying over. Oftentimes, someone would be asleep on the couch. So if you were in the kitchen, it was common of you to peek around the corner, to see if whoever was on the couch was asleep, before walking past them, to go to the bedroom. Not wanting to be awkward, my brother acted like he was asleep, so whoever was in the kitchen, would feel comfortable about walking past him, to go to Tom's room. My brother then opened his eyes, to see this large figure step out from around the corner in the kitchen. It was so dark, that it completely blocked the light, coming from the clock on the oven. It stood about 9 feet tall, and had long arms, that were almost on the floor. The large hands, started to twist and move around, similar to the old woman he saw at our old apartment. Through the crack of Tom's door, was his blinking computer light, that dimly shined into the kitchen. Thinking that it was maybe this blinking light, casting a shadow in the kitchen. He bravely jumped off the couch, slammed Tom's door shut, then ran back to the couch. Hoping that the figure would now have disappeared, he slowly looked back towards the kitchen. To his horror, the figure was now closer, at the edge of the living room, staring at him. The dark shadow was still moving and twisting his fingers in the air. My brother became so filled with fear that the only thing he could do was pull the blanket over his face and wait. Later that summer, a small hurricane would pass through southern Louisiana. Jobs and universities closed down for a few days, while the storm rained down. Before the hurricane made landfall, my parents traveled to Texas for a business meeting. Knowing the house would be empty, I decided to go home and stay there during the storm and have some friends over. The day that the storm was expected to hit, I traveled back home with a bag of clothes and supplies. That night, I got a text from a few friends, asking if I could drive them to my place, since we were all going to be drinking. I said no problem, and grabbed the keys to my truck. It was around 10 p.m. at night, as we pulled back into my parents' driveway. I noticed that a few of my friends' cars are in the driveway, as they waited for me to get home. I walked to the back door to unlock it, and let everyone in, when I realized I left the spare house key I used to let myself in, on the kitchen counter. We were locked out, but I knew my next-door neighbor had a spare key. I told my friends to stay here, while I go ask my neighbor for the key, since I didn't want him to know I was having friends over while my parents were away. I quickly got the spare key, and went to unlock the door. One of the girls in the group asked me why I didn't have my brother let us inside since he was home. The truth was, my brother did not come home with me. She said while I was walking over to my neighbors, she saw someone walk across the hallway, and it looked like a tall man, thinking it was my brother. At this point, I'm convinced someone has broken into my parents' house. I rushed back over to my neighbor's house, and told him what happened. He worked for the sheriff's office, so he grabbed his pistol, and went inside to clear the house. He checked every nook and cranny, but found no one, and no signs that anyone broke in. Being a cool neighbor, he promised he wouldn't tell my parents about any of this, as he went back to his home for the night. We all had a great time, drinking and enjoying each other's company. The night was coming to an end, and everyone made their way back home, except for my friend, we'll call James. James lived a few houses down the street from my parents, and didn't want to walk home through the storm. I told him it was all good, and that he could go to sleep in my brother's old bedroom. I went to my old room, and called it a night. As I'm laying in bed, I hear the sound of my brother's door fling open, followed by footsteps frantically running towards my room. James threw open my bedroom door, and quickly asked me if I was playing a prank on him. He said that while he was laying in bed, the closet door handle began to violently shake. He watched the handle move up and down, before hearing a loud bang in the closet. At this point, the cat was out of the bag, and we sat on the floor in my room, as I began to tell him all the stories from over the years. After a while, we started to make fun of the situation we were in, and decided to just go back to bed. But as soon as we made that decision, my parents' bedroom door from down the hall slammed shut. The raging storm outside grew louder, as we talked about what to do next. We decided to sleep with my door locked, and waited out until morning. That morning, everything in the house seemed normal. Later that day, my parents returned home from Texas. I told them everything that happened, and we all shared a good laugh. My parents thought we were just scaring ourselves, and in good humor, made fun of us. My dad then stood up, and jokingly told the ghost to quit scaring the kids, and instead pick on someone his size. As he was making this grand gesture, a large gold cross, inside of a shadow box that was leaning against the wall on the fireplace, flew across the mantel, and sent pieces of glass flying, as it landed in the middle of the living room, feet away from where my dad was standing. We all became silent, in disbelief. We could no longer deny the reality, that something was going on inside of our home. A few days later, a local priest would come to the home and bless it. I cannot confirm if this released any spirits, because my parents suddenly divorced and sold the house, as they went their separate ways. In part 4, I will tell you all about the last paranormal encounter I have ever had. I hope you enjoyed part 3 of my real-life series. If you have any questions or thoughts about these events, I would love to hear them. So please put them in the comments section down below. And remember, if you hear a bump in the night, it's on the witching hour.